The UFC is back after a several-week hiatus. What better way to start off the new year than with an electric Apex card to a sold-out crowd of 30 people? Let's get right into this card. I'm going to break down each fight. First off, we have Nurullo Aliev taking on Joe Solecki. We haven't really seen Aliev since February of 2023, so a bit of a layoff, although he performed so well in that fight. He's likely the best Tajik fighter on the roster, really strong grappler, has a good motor too, so he doesn't really gas out. I don't really see Solecki having an answer for the wrestling here. I mean, we saw him get dominated by grapplers before, like Grant Dawson. I think Aliev wins a decision pretty easily here to kick the card off. First fight of 2025. Next up is a matchup between Fatima Kline and Viktoria Dudakova. Fatima fought up in her debut versus Jasmine Jasdavicius. And she had some good moments in that fight. Jasmine's a really tough opponent, especially to be taking on in your debut. I think she's a much more well-rounded fighter than Dudakova. Her striking's definitely going to be a lot better. I think she'll be able to hang in the grappling as well. And I think she's just going to be a lot faster, too. I think that's going to be pretty apparent quickly here. We're taking Kline by decision. Next up is a light heavyweight matchup between Magomed Gadzhiyasulov and Bruno Lopes. Lopes kind of got stunned in his Dana White Contender Series debut. That was versus Brenson Ribeiro. He was a huge favorite in that fight, and Ribeiro just starked him. And honestly, going into that fight, I was watching it live, and I didn't love what I was hearing coming out of Lopes. I mean, he was talking about kind of taking a layoff. He just did not feel like he was fully committed to MMA. And when that happens, you're going to find yourself in trouble. And that is what kind of happened there. Speaking of Brenson Ribeiro, he was Magomed Gadzhiyasulov's most recent opponent and gave Gadzhiyasulov all he could handle. We saw eventually the grappling and the cardio of Gadzhiyasulov kind of helped him get the win there, but it was not easy going. Ribeiro landed some hard leg kicks, so definitely I have a lot of questions about Gadzhiyasulov. Doesn't seem to have a whole lot of power, but he's got a few KOs under his belt. So we'll see if he can answer some of those question marks. I do think he's going to get the win over Bruno Lopes, and perhaps we get like a ground and pound KO here. His grappling definitely is strong, but we'll see what Gadzhiyasulov can do in this matchup. Next up is Ernesta Kareckaite and Nicolle Caliari. I don't know the first thing about either of these two fighters. Didn't really look into this fight too deeply, kind of putting this breakdown together pretty last minute here. But really only 3 UFC fights between them, so not a whole lot to go off of. And if from what I can tell, it feels like the betting line is just because Ernesta is going to be way bigger than Caliari. And yeah, I don't know. That's all the reason I need to really take Ernesta in this matchup. Next up is Preston Parsons taking on Jacobe Smith. And Smith might be the most hyped fighter to come out of the most recent season of Dana White Contender Series. Definitely top 5. He's a really, really strong grappler, super athletic. And what I like most about him is when he's in top position, which he is able to find himself in because he's such a good wrestler, he's always looking to deal damage. We saw it in his Contender Series fight. When he got on top, he wasn't just laying and praying. He was laying and banging. And I think that's really good to see that that's kind of instinct. These judges are valuing damage over everything these days, or at least they're supposed to. And I think that's going to go a long way for him finding success in the UFC. Parsons is a big welterweight, so he's going to be a tough guy to get down and keep down. I don't know if we've really seen someone dominate him in the grappling too much up to this point, so he might be a hard guy to put away, but I think Jacobe Smith is just going to be absolutely relentless with the wrestling and find a win here on the cards. Next up is Thiago Moises taking on Trey Ogden. Moises is the younger guy here. He's 29 versus 35 years old for Trey Ogden, but Ogden's looked a lot better as of late. Moises, I don't know, just has not looked like the same guy that perhaps he once was. I don't know what that is exactly. Maybe he's just in a slump, but I haven't loved what I've seen out of him recently. Ogden should be on a 3-fight win streak win streak. He is on a 2-win streak here, but he did have a bizarre kind of no contest versus Nick Moda, a fight that he was absolutely going to go on to win. I think Ogden's going to neutralize the grappling of Thiago Moises, and when you do that, Moises doesn't really have a whole lot to give you. I think we could even see Ogden win some of those grappling exchanges if they do come up, so we're taking Ogden to win this one by decision. Next up is a matchup between Marco Tulio and Ihor Potieria. Tulio, another Dana White Contender Series alum, very highly touted, I would say. He's a little bit older. I mean, he's already 30 years old. So he's not like one of these guys coming in from the Dana White Contender Series that's super green. Doesn't have a lot of fights, but the guy definitely looks ready for the big show. He's super built. He's really explosive. We saw him beat Yusri Belagri, or whatever his name is, the guy who trains with Pereira all the time, kickboxer, tall, kind of difficult opponent. We saw him beat him in the Contender Series. He didn't get a contract, went on his own and, got a KO in an LFA fight, I think, and then came back on the Contender Series and scored a really flashy KO. So this guy's definitely the real deal, I think. Ihor Potieria, we've seen him bounce around to 185 a little bit. This is going to be at 205. I don't know. I just don't think he's going to have a whole lot for Tulio. Potieria, he's kind of he can be dangerous, but we haven't really seen him beat a really strong opponent pretty much ever in the UFC. I think Tulio's going to run through him. He's going to find a KO here quick. Next up is Jose Johnson taking on Felipe Bunes. Bunes is 0-1 in the UFC. He lost his debut to Josh Van. He's kind of a career 500 fighter. He throws a lot of spinning stuff. And, he's definitely a bit unorthodox in that regard. Jose Johnson, he's a guy who's shown flashes, definitely striking-wise. He's very strong, definitely an explosive fighter, has some one of the crazier highlight reels you'll see, but we haven't seen that translate a whole lot to the octagon, and primarily it's because of his lack of grappling. So until Jose Johnson shows me some major improvements in the grappling department, I just cannot pick him to really win against pretty much anybody, especially a Brazilian who has shown a bit of grappling in his debut versus Josh Van. We're taking Bunes by decision. Next up is Punas Soriano versus Uros Medic. Both these guys are pretty solid strikers. I'd say Medic has a wider range of skills. I mean, Puna really likes to get it done with his hands. Medic will mix some kicks in. He'll throw some back fists and stuff. I think Medic is a really, really good fighter. Pretty similar skill sets here, so it could just be whoever lands first. I'm anticipating a war between these two, but I think Uros Medic is just the slightly more skilled striker out of these two. I think he'll be a bit faster and have a bit better cardio. I think he can find a KO in what could turn into an absolute dogfight here. Next up is Christian Rodriguez taking on Austin Bashi. Bashi is another highly touted prospect. We saw him go on the Contender Series and dominate. Got a lot of hype around him. He's, I would say, primarily a grappler. 13-0, so another guy who's had his fair share of fights before debuting in the UFC. Rodriguez, on the other hand, he's coming off of a round 1 submission loss versus Julian Erosa. Pretty crazy submission. I mean, he got caught in a guillotine in Erosa's guards. Something you don't really see. You don't really see people land guillotines. Was I calling it a guillotine before? I don't know. You don't really see people landing guillotines off of their back too often. So I can't imagine C-Rod really getting caught in anything like that again. I don't know. I think C-Rod's gonna surprise Bashi here. Bashi's super young. Rodriguez you can assume he's been training for a bit longer. He's got a really strong grappling base, and I like what I've seen out of Rodriguez's striking a bit better than what I've seen out of Bashi. So we're taking Rodriguez to win a decision here as an underdog. Next up is Chris Curtis versus Roman Kopylov. Kopylov is I would say a top 10 fighter for about a round and a half. And then after that, the guy just falls off and pretty much has nothing left in the tank. I mean, we saw him win a decision over Cesar Almeida, who's fighting next on the card here. And he was able to, mix in the grappling to get that done. It definitely didn't look like he was dominating on the feet, but he had a bit of success there. Against most opponents, Kopylov is going to want to get his hands going, and he's got really strong kicks. I mean, I think he has some of the most devastating kicks in the division. But, yeah, really, the story here is the lack of cardio after Roman Kopylov. I think Curtis is going to know how to pace this fight to leave a lot in the tank in the third round, where I think he can just start putting it on Kopylov. Curtis is a guy who I think just gives a lot of middleweights trouble because they're not used to fighting guys kind of built like him with his skill set. Super defensive, striking, hard guy to, land cleanly on. The guy gives a lot of people trouble, and I think he's given better fighters than Kopylov trouble and even defeated them. So I think Chris Curtis can withstand the first round and a half of Kopylov, and by the time Kopylov is tired, I think Curtis is just going to put it on him and get a round 3 KO. Almeida versus Abdul Razak Al Hassan is next. I touched on it a little bit just now when talking about Roman Kopylov, but yeah, Almeida is coming off of a loss to Kopylov, but the guy is a pretty decorated kickboxer. Even though Abdul Razak Al Hassan has that judo background, we haven't really seen him kind of implement the grappling too much. He's primarily a striker in the UFC, and I think that's just going to be tough versus Cesar Almeida, who's way craftier, doesn't have insane power, but he's an accurate puncher, and in a stand-up fight, he's going to beat most guys in the division. I think Almeida wins this one by decision. Our co-main event is a bit of a snoozer. It's Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Carlston Harris. Ponzinibbio is 1-4 in his last 5 fights. Has not really looked too great. I mean, I think he had that KO over Alex Morono and hasn't really had much success besides that in recent memory. He's taking on Carlston Harris, who just got KO'd brutally by Chaos Williams. We took Carlston in that fight. Not our best pick there. Chaos has a bunch of power. Really not much at stake between these two. I mean, Ponzinibbio, I'd say, is the bigger name. He's been around the block, been fighting in the UFC for years and years. Carlston did kind of show up late in the game. Both are in their upper 30s, kind of twilights of their careers. I mean, I don't know. I'm going to take Ponzinibbio to win this one by decision. He's got quite a bit of experience, and Harris did just come off of a pretty destructive he got KO'd bad. So, Ponzinibbio decision is going to be the pick there. And finally, we have our main event is Mackenzie Dern taking on Amanda Ribas. This is the rematch they first fought in 2019, a fight that Ribas pretty much dominated. I mean, she looked way better on the feet. Dern was pretty much lost. And then in the grappling exchanges, Ribas ended up on top in most of the times. I mean, Dern was able to take her down a couple times, and Ribas would just get back up immediately. Ribas is 2-3 in her last 5 fights, and coming off of most recently a loss to Namajunas in a main event. So this is going to be her second main event in a row that she is headlining. Mackenzie Dern, on the other hand, she's coming off of a win versus Lupe Godinez. And I honestly hesitate to even bring up the 2019 fight because Dern looks like a completely different fighter nowadays than she did back then. Obviously, she was undefeated before, and she's had her fair share of losses. But watching her, I mean, you can see the tremendous improvements she's made. She's so much faster now. Looks to just be in much better shape. And the striking difference between when she was pretty much just debuting in 2019 and now is pretty significant. I also think just physically, she's just a lot stronger now. I mean, you can pretty much see it. Lupe Godinez is a big win. I mean, Lupe is a really tough fighter in the division. And, yeah, I think Dern has improved a lot more since 2019. And Ribas, I don't know if you can really quite say the same. So feels like Dern is due for a big win. And what bigger win than to find a submission here versus a fellow. I have to imagine Ribas is a black belt in jiu-jitsu. So we're taking Dern to win this one by decision. And with that is the breakdown. First one of 2025 in the books. Looking forward to many more here. So let's have a year in UFC.